Contact teaching and learning at universities and other higher learning institutions is now allowed. Minister Blade Nzimande says all students may return to campus from the 1st of October. However, institutions will have to outline and implement a plan of action on how students will return to class. Watch.
I'm pleased to say that we are now in a position to welcome back 100% of our university students, including all those international students who are currently outside the borders of South Africa. All universities are implementing their plans to return all students and staff from the 1st of October, subject to any restriction linked to their own risk assessment due to their local context and conditions. It must be noted, however, that COCTA prescriptions do apply, including the safety and hygiene protocols. In addition, we'll now also be able to move a 50% occupancy of rooms up to a maximum of 250 persons indoor at a time, with ventilation of rooms remaining very critical.
Joining us now to unpack the new regulations for higher education is the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Buti Manamela. DM, good evening and thank you very much for your time.
Good evening and thank you for having me here.
Outline for us the work that has been put in with the institutions to get to this point where we are ready to welcome 100% of the students on campus.
Look, I think firstly what I must indicate is that we started work around March when the first lockdown was announced. The minister put in place a task team which I have been chairing, which consisted of all the stakeholders, and the intention was to prepare for this moment. And as you know, the President and the National Command Council made various announcements in terms of the different levels. We had indicated that all students will return to campus once we reach lockdown level 1. And therefore, all the work that we've been doing building up to this, has been building up to this. We've had, firstly, students who are, in the medical sciences returning first, and then with postgraduates and all of that. And then we had first-year students, and now we're going to have all the students returning on campus. But what we must emphasize is that we have to observe all the protocols. I think there's an assumption out there that once we get to level 1, it means either COVID-19 is gone, and therefore people are no longer social distancing, people are no longer wearing their masks, they are no longer sanitizing. Of course, there are those who still follow those prescripts, and this is what's going to be happening on campus. I and the minister have been visiting campuses just to ascertain that all these protocols are being followed, and we'll be continuing with that. For instance, tomorrow I'm in the Eastern Cape, and we'll be going to most other campuses. The idea is that we need to put students in a much more comfortable position for them to learn, and also so that we're able to save the academic year. But of primary importance is our intention to save lives. Yes. And that's why we're insisting that all the government protocols that have been put in place have to be followed by all universities. We've been working with...
But with all that work that you've put in, there's still some capacity issues. I mean, if we are talking just the universities, only 10 at this particular point aim to complete their year, while you've got the other 4, 7 and 5 who will kind of phase in their completion.
Yeah. I think the beauty with our assessment and working together with all the universities is the fact that we have removed all the universities from the red flag. So we've put in place certain indicators whose intention is to help us assess whether a university is ready to accept students or not. And when we announced the 66% return, we're quite worried that more than 10 of our universities were still in the red flag, and we therefore have been working with them continuously, and all of those universities have now, in what we call the orange, and then, the other universities are in the green. And this is as it relates to completing the academic year. Remember that COVID-19 caused a disruption. Students had to leave campus, some of them abruptly without their learner support materials, textbooks, laptops, and all of that. And we have worked with all the universities to make sure that they give students the necessary support, they give the lecturers the necessary support. And we're quite excited that even though there are some universities that are still, flagged as orange, we're quite hopeful that by the time the basic education release their matric results, which will be on the 23rd of February 2021, most universities would have almost completed the academic year and will be ready to welcome a new core of students from grade 12, but also those who may have succeeded in the 2020 academic year.
You completed 68% of the laptop procurement or digital device procurement up to this point. There are still challenges there, are there?
There are still challenges, yes. There were problems, with the first attempt to procure a laptop, and those challenges range from, the ability of some of the people who tendered for that, to supply the number of gadgets that we wanted, and there were also, several complaints, and therefore that's why, the minister, NSFAS, decided to cancel the contract. But we're quite confident that with the current process, we will be able to complete this process latest by the end of this month. What we must emphasize, though, is that there has been this mentality that we want to base our learning and teaching on laptops, but we have introduced what we call the multimodal form of learning, where it's beyond having the gadget, it's having the textbooks with you wherever you are. It's the whole issue around connectivity. So it's multiple interventions which we've been implementing since then. But what we emphasize also with universities and TVET colleges is that the students will be returning now. We'll have to make an assessment whether they have been going through learning and teaching whilst they were at home. If not, there must be some catch-up program introduced, as we've committed
There's an announcement while you're there that will create some level of unhappiness. I wonder how much consultation has happened with the students, that you will be pulling back on the supply of data as more students are returning.
Well, of course. I mean, once they're on campus, we have, data available on campus. Most, if not all, universities, have got Wi-Fi capability, have got LAN capability. We have rolled out to all the TVET colleges through, the South African, network, enabled all the TVET colleges to have, all of those capabilities. In any way, the commitment that the minister had made earlier on was that we are going to be supplying data for a period of 3 months. So there shouldn't be any surprise, along those lines. We must understand that some of the interventions that we're making in this period were precisely because we're going through a crisis. Yeah. Students were forced to go home, be at home, and therefore we had to give them the support that they need for them to be able to, to study. So it shouldn't really be a cause for alarm. Why should we spend extra money giving students data directly when we are already subsidizing universities and institutions of higher learning to procure infrastructure which will enable them, to deal with this?
What Let's talk about those devices. Are they on loan, or do they belong to the students?
Well, there is going to be a mix in terms of how the devices operate. At the end of their academic period, students should have either committed to to repay the device as a loan, or through their NSFAS grant, pay the loan. So we also want to encourage, responsibility on the part of the students, so that they don't regard this as something that's free, and therefore either they can pass it over or easily lose it, and all of that. What I really wanted to, flag earlier on is the fact that we obviously were exposed as a country. Our capability in terms of, accessibility with regards to connectivity, access to gadgets and devices and all of that. So what we have had discussions with, particularly in the task team and the various task teams that have been put into place, and generally in government, is that there obviously has to be a new normal. Yes. We don't want to have a situation wherein we have to, have to procure in bulk laptops or data or anything of the sort, because even outside of COVID-19, it has to be the, normal that any student should have access to data, should have access to devices, and those kind of arrangements are what we're looking for.
I mean, there are some universities that were already kind of moving towards that hybrid model, which you're mentioning, which will include face-to-face as well as the digital platform. But are all our universities able to fund this transition? Of course, knowing that you are cutting back on subsidies because government generally is cutting back because they've had to reprioritize the funding because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And you've got students who are unable to pay because of the economic situation at this particular point.
Look, I mean, so our assessment when we began this project was that there are universities which had completely funded their students to have access to devices, data, and connectivity, but there were those which were lacking. For instance, you know, the University of Venda had already started with this project 3 years ago. You know, and we remember now, you know, Wits University, for instance, was beginning to procure laptops for students who are unable to afford them. So all of those nitty-gritties are things which we'll have to deal with into the future. And I think that sometimes we work on the basis of you know, assumptions and generalizations, but when you actually go into the ground, it is fewer students who you know, today do not have access to you know, all of these things. And that's why the result of the first semester in most of the universities are showing, firstly, high participation rate, meaning students were attending online or in whatever platform that universities had created. But secondly, that the results are showing something completely different. And that's why when people say, no, we must have pass one, pass all, and all, you are undermining the capability and capacity of students to study under the conditions which they didn't choose. You know, and most of them have done very well. So we are quite confident that, especially now with students returning on campus, we will have even better results for the second semester.
Now, the unions have already touted the idea of reviewing methods of assessment when you're talking about matrics. Have you had that conversation for higher education?
Well, look, you had to have an assessment of what kind, I mean, a review of the assessment now that you're removing a student from a classroom and you're saying they must go and study at home. So it means physically you cannot examine them. And I must applaud many of our universities who've done very well in being innovative by coming up with some of the assessment methods which still maintained the integrity of the academic period 2020, you know, but also ensured that they do not discriminate or, you know, well, discriminate students from, you know, from learning. And I must say that, you know, some of the vice chancellors who are responsible for, or deputy vice chancellors who are responsible for learning and teaching in our universities have indicated that they are willing to keep some of the assessment methods which came out in this period because they believed it worked. It kept the students engaged. They had to go out and search for information and all of that. And I think it's quite an exciting period, which obviously is coming out of a disaster, but it's a learning curve. Now, looking into next year, we are going to obviously be faced with an interesting period wherein the matric results are announced at a different period. And what we have said to all the universities is that they need to be ready to start, at least for now, applications. And I want to call on all those who are doing their grade 12, make your applications now to whatever university you want to go and study in, or whatever TVET college that you want to go and study in. Also, let's make application for the National Student Financial Aid Scheme. Those applications are closing at the end of November. Let's not find ourselves in a situation wherein you pass next year, your grade 12, and then you don't have a university to go to, a TVET college to go to, or you don't have you know, an NSFAS bursary for you to be able to start. So I really want to encourage parents, students, everyone who's doing their grade 12 to start applying now.
Appreciate your time, and thank you for coming into the studio and being with us today.
Thank you so much.
He's the Deputy Minister of Higher Education, Innovation and Technology there, Buti Manamela.